I want you all to see a really important tweet from a journalist, an investigative journalist for The Intercept named Li Feng. I find Li Feng is he works for Intercept, which has a left-wing slant in their reporting. But he's a straight shooter, and this was his response to the suspect in the Brooklyn subway shooting. The Brooklyn shooter suspect has a long history of black identity extremism, like lots of mass shooters, but many leftists simultaneously argue that this ideology doesn't exist and FBI should ignore it, and if it does exist, police are powerless to stop it. Kind of a contradiction. So the FBI does have this, has talked about black identity extremism as they've done white identity extremism. And just that term, black identity extremism, has been so triggering for the left. And I've been putting a bit of thought into this. They have that same type of impulse as well in reaction whenever I or others do reporting or bring attention to those who were convicted of crimes that happened at Black Lives Matter or Antifa riots, and those who even killed for the ideology. And I think the reason why they're particularly protective of black identity extremism is that a lot of that ideology overlaps with their ideology of the contemporary sort of leftist cultural Marxist view. And that's why you see them cover for these black identity violence extremists. And there's been a lot, actually, just in the past couple of years. I'm going to pull up a couple of cases. And this is Micah Xavier Johnson. I showed his picture a little bit ago because the subway mass shooting suspect had shared his picture. And Johnson is accused of, not accused, he killed 5 cops at a BLM protest in Dallas in July 2016, and he was killed by police. And then there's Gavin Long, who is a black nationalist, and he shot 6 cops in July 2016, had a black nationalist worldview and a very virulent hatred of police. He killed 3 cops. So yeah, it wasn't just 2020 that BLM made a very big serious impact in the US. We remember that just because the riots were so long and so violent and so deadly. But going back years now, we've had those who, like Gavin Long, who I just talked about, he carried out the shooting after there was a BLM martyr. And so, this was in the context of protests happening all over the United States, and these black nationalists would use the opportunity to carry out deadly attacks against police. Most of you probably don't recognize this individual. This is Corey Ali Muhammad. And in April 2017, he went on a mass shooting spree in Fresno, California, because of his, and was in his own words, his stated hatred of white people, particularly white men. So he murdered 4 people, attempted to murder others. He was convicted of the 4 murders, convicted for the attempted murders he did to others, and he was convicted and imprisoned. So you see a lot of people at left-wing protests very casually do that fist. It has a long history and many meanings. I mean, doesn't mean just black power, even though that's how it's often associated now. Communists have used it in other parts of the world, but it's very much a leftist symbol. And the fact that it's been branded as a sort of like this virtue signaling symbol that people print out or put on the social media or just do all the time without recognizing the context and history about it. It just shows you how effective the far left has been in mainstreaming and normalizing their ideas. And that wasn't even all. I'm going just past the last few years. And I'm not surprised if a lot of you are like, I don't remember this in the news. I don't remember this. There's a lot of this stuff I barely even remember. The Black Lives Matter mass shooter in Dallas, I got a lot of attention because there was a really long like standoff and negotiation attempt with Michael Johnson and the robot that they sent in. That did get a lot of national media attention. And 5 cops getting killed is a big deal. But somebody, the ideology that they espouse proudly and was radicalizing, that is what you didn't get a lot of attention in. Whereas when people think of Dylan Roof, they don't just think of the fact that he murdered people in a church, people who opened up their house of worship to him and welcomed him, and he murdered them. But what's crucial about the case of Dylan Roof is that he had this long history of extremist far-right beliefs and racist beliefs, and that's really important to the story. I don't think like that type of coverage that was done on Dylan Roof should be done on these Black identity extremists, but it's not. It's a privilege that you can get if you are a violent extremist who's not right wing. So it doesn't. I'm not even going to brand it left or like white or person of color. It's really about, if it's not a right wing ideology that's motivating the extremists, then the press generally isn't very interested. You see that, of course, with jihadism, Black identity extremism, Antifa-violent extremism, etc. So this next image that I'm showing of Black Hebrew Israelites, David Anderson on the left and Francine Graham. So they had a violent hatred of Jews and police, and in a lot of these violent Black extremist attacks, there's anti-Semitism in it. So, you take out if the perpetrator had been white, it would have been very much explosive media stories, right? Because you have like violent extremism and anti-Semitism, but because the perpetrators are Black, that really can mute the story. David Anderson and Francine Graham, in December 2019, they went to Jersey City, New Jersey. First, they shot and killed an officer, and then they went to a kosher store and killed 3 people inside, and then they died in a shootout with police. They had a large explosive on them that did not detonate or failed to detonate, and it had the capacity, in some of the reporting I read, to injure or kill people in as large of a space as a football field. So they were really serious martyrs, and the ideology, the evidence that you could see is that they were Black Hebrew Israelites. So quite often with these Black identity extremists, you can see both at the same time or one or the other. It's usually Nation of Islam ideology or Black Hebrew Israelite. And both these are Black nationalist identities. So that's not all. I'm just up to December 2019. Then April 2021, this is a bit more recent. You might remember there was Noah Green. He was a Black nationalist with the Nation of Islam. And he went by the name Noah X. He was very inspired by Malcolm X. And he's the one who did the car ramming attack at the U.S. Capitol. And he killed a U.S. Capitol officer and injured another and was killed by responding police. He died in the hospital from his injuries. That case took place in the context of just months after the 6th of January, when the Capitol was extremely fortified with all the fencing and barriers and all the performances that you saw day in and day out by Democrats, right? About suddenly reversing all the police hatred and saying, we're thankful for the police for protecting us on 6th of January. The police protected us from these white supremacists, Trump supporters, right-wing terrorists. We need to honor them. And then when this officer died in this Black nationalist attack at the Capitol, it was just kind of like, next. Like, even I was a bit surprised by the media, because I thought, okay, for there to be a deadly attack on a law enforcement officer with a car ramming attack at the Capitol so soon after 6th of January, it's going to be covered. Like, with more intensity than if it was at some other time. But I mean, the suspect was named and identified very quickly. He was a black man, a black nationalist of the Nation of Islam. So, yeah. There is a case of Quintet Brown, and he was a Black Lives Matter activist in Louisville, Kentucky. He had been given an editorial position to write about BLM and race issues at a prestigious legacy paper. He was featured a lot in the media coverage because he was kind of everything that white leftists wanted to see, right? Like a good-looking, smart, university-educated Black Lives Matter leader who says all the things that hits the talking points, right? He felt a sense of victimhood. I mean, I read some of his columns and they were pretty crap, to be honest. One of them was he wrote about his experience with swimming and how him being a black person felt really unsafe in swimming pools, and that it was this very big accomplishment in an act of bravery to go swimming. And you know, this was stuff he was getting paid for, and that his colleagues and leftists and liberals thought was like amazing. So Mr. Brown was arrested last year and charged with being the person who attempted to assassinate a Jewish Democrat mayoral candidate in Louisville. The gunman in that case fired several rounds. Fortunately, the rounds missed the mayoral candidate. So nobody died, nobody was injured. Mr. Brown was arrested and charged, and he paid his bail. He was out very, very quickly. Which, by the way, again, you often hear from the leftists who capitalize on some type of, crimes that happen. They always say, if the suspect is black, they'll be dead before they're arrested. And no, it depends. It depends. One, are they armed and dangerous? Are they shooting back at police? Are they resisting arrest? Is there some other threat? There are other reasons. And to just simplify it into this whole race thing, like people, I don't know, they should be embarrassed for saying that, but nonetheless they do. And it carries a certain amount of currency on social media. So yeah, Mr. Brown, that criminal case is still going. And by the way, I went on, he was very active on Twitter. He retweeted Antifa stuff. An Antifa source, it's going down. He tweeted a lot about fears of Nazism and fascism, and then he had all the stuff about black identity and black nationalism. He had clearly been radicalized. It was different than just the normal BLM stuff he was talking about before. Actually, would I say different? It was less hidden, I would say, because Black Lives Matter, a lot of the people who are involved in that movement ideology are black nationalists, but they are savvy in focusing less on that and more about how to guilt people into gullible white people into donating money. And then there's Darrell Brooks, the Waukesha Christmas parade massacre suspect. So with him, as soon as a name was known that he had been apprehended, I went and found his social media, and there was also stuff about BLM, and he had at least in some posts, a hatred of white people, And again, it remains to be seen if he was motivated by that ideology when he carried out that attack. Over 60 people were injured, 6 people were killed. They were all white. Elderly, and one very young child. Very horrific, I mean, you guys have seen the videos of allegedly Mr. Brooks driving in this sort of zigzag type of way that ran over as much people as possible. So, and then back to Frank James, the subway massacre suspect. He was apprehended after about a 30-hour manhunt. He was uninjured. yeah, he's been arrested and booked into jail. He has all these charges. He has one terrorism related charge, because the attack had happened in a public transport in New York City, by the way. So yeah, that story kind of went, well, people moved on quickly from it.